Oh yes, the sound of Captain Dan, I do love it. All you real swashbucklers, put your hooks in the air. Oh yes, it's good stuff, it's good stuff. Right, I've got one last topic to cover. I'm going to leave the whole US and EU transfers thing floating in the air and just simply leave the question, why? Can anyone come up with a reason? I'll give you an entire week to think of one. Because I can't. I sat here thinking about it for ages and I could not find a reason. So if any of you can come up with it, then by all means. So I'm going to go straight on into, of course, the one and only
Second Wind!
Second win for this week. Second win gives you the opportunity to contribute to the show by taking on the topic, and I give you a week to come up with an answer. Email me the answer, and the good ones get read out on the show next week. It's a crazy continuity kind of thing. Yeah. So, this week, I'm going to be doing something completely different. It's got nothing to do with crafting or anything like that. It's not even got anything to do with gear. And I call it Talking Trees. No, I'm not talking about the Tree of Lol. I'm talking about the idea of the support tree. I was reading an article on WoW Insider, and I do love WoW Insider. I had a lot of ideas from there, wowinsider.com. And I was reading an article called Arcane Brilliance, a case for arcane mages. And I've got to say that I disagreed with pretty much all of it. It was silly. To be honest, it's like the person who wrote it hadn't actually raided with a mage of any kind and wasn't really sure, and was just kind of trying to push the idea that, hey, every spec is viable when it actually isn't. And that's fine, because that's his opinion, and again, that's the great thing about editorials and places like WoW Insider, you get to see different opinions. However, I disagree. And I posted a variety of reasons as to why. And the reason that I specifically pointed out was, it's like Arcane was designed to be a support tree, but isn't constructed properly in order to be so. It's like all the really good stuff that you would want to contribute to an existing spec is too far down the tree to actually be useful at all. So, instead of being a support tree, it becomes your main tree, and it's not good enough to be your main tree. For instance, it runs out of mana too easily. It doesn't have high enough DPS, it's not good enough utility, it's got too many GIMP talents. I'm sure all of you have seen trees like this before. GIMP talents which are effectively a waste of points, but you need to take anyway in order to get down to the next tier. Now, good talent trees don't have those. As a mage, I can only speak for myself, but Fire and Frost do not have those. As in, I can take however many points of fire, and every single talent that I take will be useful, and I will never be forced to take a talent that I don't want, simply to get to a talent that I do. And therein, of course, is good tree design, exceptionally good tree design. There's a few options here and there, but yeah, it's a good solid tree design. Now, the Arcane tree can be viewed as a support tree, and I'm sure you guys have some as well. Let's pull some, say, survival. Yeah? You don't see many survival hunters around here. Survival could be argued that, survival is the Arcane. Does it have any support abilities in it? I don't know. I'm not a hunter. Well, let's go and have a look. This is, of course, from my totally noobish hunter perspective. Let's go to wowhead.com and go and have a look at the hunters. Let's go to the tools, go to the talent calculators, and look at hunters. Now, survival. Survival has various things. Survival has stuff like monster slaying, yeah? It causes critical damage, it increases your damage, it causes critical damage against beasts, giants, and dragonkin. That's pretty good. Humanoid slaying, the same. Hawkeye increases the range of your ranged weapons by 2 yards. Yeah. And here's the crazy thing. All three of these things, humanoid slaying, monster slaying, and Hawkeye, they're all tier 1. Yeah? They're all the first tier of it. I could grab all of these, and I would actually have some nice buffs. I don't know if hunters do that. I really don't. But from a neutral perspective, if I were looking at it from a mage perspective, if I had mage spells which allowed me to increase the damage against certain targets by 3%, and my ranged increase was all in the first tier, I would be a very happy bunny. Needless to say, I don't have that. Range increases are, for mages particularly, in 2 different trees, and I don't really have a problem with that. That's cool, because, to be honest, you've got to pick them up anyway. But it just demonstrates that, tier 1 of marksmanship is actually rather... not marksmanship, survival is actually rather useful. Well, we can have a look at other things. Entrapment, meh. Deflection, increases parry chance, improved wing clip. Yeah, all of this stuff, quite a lot of this stuff, at any rate, does look to be somewhat of a support tree. Whereas compared to, say, Beast Mastery or Marksmanship, Totally different. It seems like it's a bit of a support tree. And there are some exceptions, but I would say that most classes have some kind of tree which is not in itself, as in it's not a tree that you can spec into purely and be as effective as other trees. Therefore it becomes something of a support tree. There are some exceptions. Druids, as you might expect, are something of an exception. Yes, you can go and spec lots of balance. It's not a problem. But then Druids are the exception which, in my opinion, proves the rule in that respect. Paladins have similar problems. I'm sorry, but Ret Paladins are not useful in raids. There are some things in Retribution which are kind of useful, but yeah, as Ret is more, right now, a PvP spec or a support tree. It's not as useful as Protection, it's not as useful as Holy. Priests, at least it used to be this way, Discipline was very much something that was a support. Yeah? A lot of this stuff, all of this improved stuff, is very much support stuff that backs up your other spec. Yeah? Some stuff synergizes, some stuff doesn't. It's like, again, having a look at mages. Arcane Concentration. And, of course, Evocation. When Evocation used to be a talent. That was support, yeah? That backed up your existing stuff. It didn't give you new abilities, particularly that were useful to your main damage dealing. They were support for your main damage dealing. Your main damage dealing was Fire or Frost, and then you took a little bit of Arcane to support. So yeah, I would say that it is relatively safe to say that most classes, to some degree, lesser extent, greater extent, do have a support tree of sorts. I would say that, of course, there are some exceptions, Druid particularly, and of course, like I was saying before, lesser and greater extents. But there are support trees. They are there, and therein, of course, lies the problem. Now, what you've effectively got there is a variety killer. You've got a tree which is not quite as effective as the other trees. Therefore, you're not necessarily going to use it as much, which means that they reduce the number of potentially viable specs. Again, going back to the mage perspective, because that's what I know best, Arcane. Yeah? If I'm looking at Arcane, I don't see a tree that is viable on its own. I've tried it. I have gone a 40 spec with Arcane. I have gone a full spec with Arcane, and neither of them are effective in raids. They suck. Sorry, they are just rubbish. They're nowhere near as good as Deep Fire is. They're nowhere near as good as Deep Frost. So, you've got a support tree there. And it's too much reliant on GIMP talents in order to get great talents. I mean, you can have a look at it. Go to Wowhead and have a look at the Mage tree. If you've never seen the Mage trees, go and have a look at Arcane. Yeah? What you've got there, your first tier of stuff is nigh on useless. Yeah? To some degree. If you're playing... this is going to be controversial. If you're playing an Arcane Mage, you don't need 40% threat reduction, because you're not doing enough damage to justify having it. I always found that particular talent something of an irony, Arcane Subtlety. Reduces the threat of your Arcane spells by 40%. I always found that incredibly ironic, because I've never seen anyone pull aggro with Arcane Missiles. It's a channeled, steady DPS spell. Why would you pull aggro with it? I've never seen it happen. Arcane Focus. Reduce the chance that your opponent can resist your arcane spells by 10%. Yeah, okay, that's fine. But that's only useful for, say, an arcane-specific mage. As a support talent, that's no use for me. I don't cast arcane spells, except for maybe Polymorph. And the amount of time that gets resisted on casts, well, it's not worth the talent points. Improved Arcane Missiles, again, for me, as a support tree, completely useless. Yep. And you can look at the rest of it. One specialisation, lal. Arcane Concentration, arguably the best talent in the entire tree. And then Magic Absorption, which is of limited use. And then you've got a tier of stuff which is utterly crap, at least from a support perspective. Magic Attunement, rubbish. Arcane Impact, rubbish. Arcane Fortitude, lol. From a support perspective, Tier 3 is entirely useless. Tier 4, from a raiding mage's perspective, there's only 3 points worth of stuff worth having. Improved Counterspell, not useful in a raid environment. I'm sorry, it isn't. Arcane Meditation, great. You go down again. Improved Blink, lal. Arcane Mind, though, that's cool. So, it's a very messy tree. It gets a bit better as you go further down because they added this stuff in afterwards. Stuff like Spell Power, incredible. Empowered Arcane Missiles, no use as a support, but if you're playing Arcane Pure, that's great. Arcane Power, great. Mind Mastery, great. Slow, great, but far too costly on the mana pool. So you've got something that desperately tries to be a spec that works on its own, but isn't. And again, I'm sure that you guys playing as different classes have similar things. And to greater or lesser extents, they have been improved with the talent revamp. Some stuff is still woefully lacking though. I don't see survival hunters. Okay? Survival as its own just doesn't seem to be a viable spec to me. I don't see a lot of full subtlety rogues, although there are some. Not going to dispute that there are some. Rogues are one of the examples where they've been revamped so much that they're actually now pretty good. Mage's only ever got revamped once, and Hunter revamps still didn't seem to concentrate on survival, at least from what I can see. Now, I might be talking out of my arse because I've never played a Hunter, but this is just looking at the percentage of players who play survival in comparison to marksmanship or beast mastery primary. You don't see that many survival hunters, and you certainly don't see them on raids either. So, how do we fix it? Well, it seems to me that they need to make up their mind. Do they want specs like Arcane and Survival and stuff to be viable specs on their own, or do they want them to be support trees? If you want to make them viable specs on their own, you've got a lot of work to do. You really do. You've got to sort out the issues as regards to steady raid DPS, because let's face it, that's what things seem to be balanced around these days, raiding, and that's fine because that's the big chunk of the game. You don't raid with fully Arcane. Why? Because you go too quickly. You don't raid with Survival. Why? Because, well, it's useless. LOL, 10% more HP, IRT tanking Hunter. No, I somehow can't see that happening. Arcane Resilience, lol. We can just say that over and over again. Do you want it to be a tree that can support itself, or do you want it to be a tree that supports others? Yes or no? I don't know. What do they want? But they've got to make a decision one way or the other. They really do. They have got to make a decision. Do they want it to be a support tree, or do they want it to be an independently viable tree? And if they want to make it a support tree, then some redesign has to be done. Now, I always thought that support trees should be something that you can make a greater choice in without wasting points and GIMP talents, and Arcane has that problem. GIMP talents. Talents which are useless, but you have to take anyway in order to get to others. And it does seem to me that a use of prerequisite talents would allow for support trees to become better, more useful. So if we had, say, let's take an example. Let's go pure PvE or PvP. Let's split Arcane down the middle. We'll take some of the more generically useful talents and put them in the first two tiers, yeah? So you get to pick and choose. Just like with Survival, you've got that whole extra range, you've got the extra damage to humanoids, and you've got the extra damage to giants, Dragon King, blah blah blah. Now, all of those are going to be useful to one form or another. So you can pick 5 points there in order to get down to the next tier. And maybe you've got another clump of useful stuff. Now, you can pick there. Then, you can have 2 of the big talents. Let's say, if you wanted a PvE raiding mage and you're using Arcane as a support tree, then you start that tree with clear casting. And then you prerequisite down from there to more stuff. And it prerequisites all the way down to the final talent, if you want to take it. It means that you can get more utility out of the support tree. It allows you to make a choice. If you're a PvE mage, then you can take some of the PvE prerequisite chain down to where you want and then take the rest and whatever. If you want to be a PvPing mage, you take it down and maybe you get Arcane Power or whatever. It's like saying that Arcane Power is particularly useful in raiding. It isn't. It's not. It's not designed to be a raiding ability at all. It has limited use and only limited. So why even have that there? Why even have that as your big option for PvE? Well, you simply wouldn't take it. But at the current construction of things, anyway, you pretty much end up taking it one way or the other. Because it's there. And it's a mishmash. It's a mess. It's not a real support tree. So, over the week, I want you to take your class. Have a look and see if there was any tree within your class that you would constitute as a weaker tree than the other two. That has a lot of abilities which complement your primary abilities, yet for some reason they're just too far down the tree for you to bother taking. And think of some revamps. How would you fix it? How would you revamp that particular tree? And is it your opinion that such a tree should be a pure support tree? They should just give up all ideas of it being independent? Or should it be an independent tree, and in that case, how would you buff it? Let's have your class knowledge. Let's have the experts of all the classes come to me at the murloc@gmail.com and answer that question for me. Find your support tree and fix it. You're listening to Blue Please here on WoW Radio. I've got 2 minutes before the mighty return of Octail and Hordak versus the world. And I'm going to do shout-outs. So email me, themurloc@gmail.com, with your shout-outs. Do so right now. You know you want to email themurloc@gmail.com, or PM me on IRC. With appropriately silly music in the background, you know you want to. Shout-out time come to me right now. A shout-out to Bladescope and Thar, level 70 Rogue and Warriors on the Venture Company for making very terrible analogies involving the Rift Maker and a purple Elic. I love you. Yeah. Shout out to Beaverus, who says survival is a totally viable spec for raiding. Blah, 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 whatever you say. I've not actually ever seen a survival hunter, ever. It's just insane. What else have we got? Let us go to the Gmail and find more shout-outs. Arcane mages are good. Lol. No, don't be so silly. I'm sorry, that's just daft. Don't ever send me silly shout-outs like that again. ATB, I still love your show, even though I've only heard it like 4 times. I was wondering if you give it a shout-out to oldest brother who's getting married, and my second oldest who got a boy like 2 weeks ago. Grats. That's from Fenga, from the guild Vortex. Big shout-out for Vortex. A shout-out to Kazakh EU, love, love, love. That's from Ashes. A shout-out to Octel and Hordak for the triumphant return. Salutes to Octel and Hordak versus the world. A shout-out to Apocalypse on Argent Dawn EU for wiping on trash for the second time in SSC. Focus more noobs. A shout-out to Orico, or is that Enrico? The 29 Warlock Twink on Dathramar for not being able to spell Engrish. Well, that was like the most messed up shout I've ever seen. It was actually difficult to read. A shout out to my dad for giving me his Silverstone Sly guitar. He rocks. That's from Criken Zero. A shout out to Dragonmore US and CY Radio at BlizzCon. I'll be wearing my pet Solar Nefarian shirt. A shout out to Yelfin and Thirden, where they're there. Kelteras US, Sticky Hunters for the win. Gonna get a shout out to my guild Crimson in Kara. Good luck on Netherspite, and I am done. Octel and Hordak versus the world coming up in the next 20 or so seconds. I've been Total Biscuit. This has been Blue Please. Good night.